Three, two, one, here we go. Rainman's Take podcast. Observations on the world we live in. My take on current events and other topics of interest. Also interviews with some really cool people. So let's get the conversation going. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. Just want to give a quick shout out to everybody watching. Thank you very much. I know you're going to find this next interview thought-provoking. I enjoy spending time with people like my next guest and getting into more detail about the subject matter. And I know you appreciate that as well. So go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe. That way we can continue bringing you great content in the future. So thanks again for being part of Rain Man's Take and enjoy the interview. Hey everybody, it's the Rain Man. Well, welcome back. One of my previous guests and a very good old friend of mine, Joe Snooze Crane. Joe, how you doing today?
Great, Rain Man. Great to be back.
All right, my man. So I wanted to have Joe on primarily to catch up. It's been almost a year since I last had him on Rain Man's Take. And if you remember, Joe has, over the last 7 years, has run a very successful podcast called Veteran on the Move. And so I just wanted to catch up with Joe to kind of talk a little bit more about his podcast, how it's been going, and some of the things that he's been doing to help our veterans as they sort of transition out of the military and into the civilian world and potentially into some entrepreneurial type situations. So Snooze, thanks for coming back on. And why don't you tell me a little bit about how things have been since the last time we talked last November?
Well, the podcast is still going great. You know, like personally, like last December, we decided to sell our house in Kansas City because the market was crazy. And I didn't know how long it was going to last. We sold it. We had to move into an apartment for like 7 months until our youngest graduated high school, got her off to college. And then we moved down to Florida. And we thought we were going to move into a place, this small condo we had on the beach, and wait to build a house here in Florida. But then a resale came available as we were moving into the condo. And so then we moved again over to the house. So it's just been like 7, 8 months of being in temporary housing and moving and packing and loading. And yeah, it's been crazy. We loaded up all sorts of U-boxes, and we had stuff in we had stuff in a storage unit, an office, an apartment. It was just, and then down here, we're moving stuff into multiple locations too, because my wife and I each have a small office down here, which is cool, and a storage unit and condo and now the house. And so anyways, things have been up in the air for a while now, but yeah, been able to maintain the podcast the whole time and still knock out the interviews. And so things are going good with that.
Cool. That's that whole last several months sounds a lot like the days when we were in the Marine Corps.
Oh, I know.
Living out of a bag.
Yeah, my wife's never really moved out of the local area before. And so it really was driving her way more crazy than it was me. I guess I was just used to it from 24 years in the Marine Corps and multiple PCSs and deployments. It's like, yeah, you know, it gets to you, but you just deal with it. And I was always focused on the end in mind, and yeah, it was very disruptive for her. She's better now that we're settled in. Things are better.
Nice. Let's get right into it. The last time we talked, you had sort of briefly touched on kind of some of the resources that Veteran on the Move has for veterans that are getting ready to transition out. And before we go any further, what's the website? Again, it's veteranonthemove.org.
It's a .com.
It is a .com. Okay, so it's veteranonthemove.com. So
Right.
if you're a veteran getting ready to transition out, highly recommend listening to the podcast as well as getting onto the website, because they got a lot of really good information. And the one in particular that you kind of brushed over the last time we talked, you have a document or PDF or a book called the Top 29 Entrepreneurship Programs for Veterans.
Yep.
Get into that a little bit more.
Yeah. So when I started doing years ago when I started the podcast, it's been like 7, probably going on 8 years now. Like you said, over 400 episodes. I was starting to hear people I would interview would talk about whether it's I went through the SBA Boots to Business program. And I'm like, oh, I hadn't heard of that. So I would just start writing down a list of cool programs that people had validated because they'd been through them themselves. I just started writing them down. And at one point I had like 40. A lot of them aren't around anymore. So the list is down to 29. And there's probably a bunch of them that I don't know about that are out there. And so if you go to veteranonthemove.com, if you just scroll down, go below the fold, that's where you just drop your email in there and we'll send you that list for free. And what that is a lot of them are run by universities, and a lot of them are run by nonprofits, and then some of them are just run by organizations. But like the SBA Boots to Business that I mentioned, that came up today on one of my interviews I was doing because the guy had been through that program. And I mentioned Bunker Labs in there. I was a city leader for Bunker Labs for a couple of years, just until recently we moved to Florida. And the whole point of it is, when I first started jumping into this entrepreneurship stuff and I was getting ready to retire from the Marine Corps, I had no idea how many great programs and how many great resources were out there for not just veterans, but veterans, military spouses, and their family members to help you start your own business, to help you get into entrepreneurship. And most of them are free. And a lot of them will even fly you there and run you through a weekend or a week-long or 10-day boot camp. Syracuse University has phenomenal stuff. I was just talking to my buddy. He's an Air Force pilot. Jason, he's the founder of Pre-Veteran. The concept that if you're in the military, you're a pre-veteran. You're going to be a veteran here before eventually.
Right.
He's got some great transition stuff there too. So there's so many great programs out there and resources that you just need to be aware that they're out there and then go find them. And, my, top 29 entrepreneurship programs for veterans and their families is just it's just a list of all these, of 29 of them. And there's probably hundreds more that I don't even know about. So if you're getting out, go find help, go find resources. The more in advance of getting out you do that, the better off you'll be.
That's amazing, because like you, when I was getting out, I had no idea.
Yeah, I really didn't. And I was like, okay. And I was really kind of into it. I was like heavily leaning forward, and I was like, if I don't know this stuff exists, then I guarantee you there's a lot of other people that don't know it exists. And so
in those 29, have you been to any of them? Have you talked to them at all? Or is it just more like, hey guys, here's the list, take it from there type of thing? And I would assume people are saying when they get to these programs, hey, I heard it on Veteran on the Move. Is there kind of any cross-pollination there right now, or not yet?
I think there's some of that. So most of them I obviously haven't been to, but most of the ones on that list, if not all of them, come from a recommendation of somebody that I interviewed on the podcast. So it's firsthand knowledge. And like Oklahoma State, my last couple of years in the Marine Corps, I actually went and got a master's in entrepreneurship at Oklahoma State. 100% online, but and I went down there a couple different times because we were living up in Kansas City area at the time, so I was able to drive there. And they have a VEB, Veteran Entrepreneurship Boot Camp. They have a VEB program coupled with their entrepreneurship program at the university. So one time they asked me to come after I graduated. They asked me to come down and bring the guest speaker. So I got to say a few things at the beginning of one of their VEP programs. So they brought the VEB programs. They actually bring people down. And at the time, it was like a 10-day boot camp. Like they'd fly them there and house them and feed them for 10 days. Wow. I'm not really sure if they're still doing all that or more, but it was just one example of university having a great entrepreneurship boot camp type program for veterans. And the thing was, most of the time they were looking for people to apply. Like, they've got more slots than people were applying. Just shows you that people don't know about them. It's a really good deal. And then the other one on there is Bunker Labs. Like I said, I was a city leader there in Kansas City for Bunker Labs. And we started up the chapter there in Kansas City when I was there, which was cool. And we got the momentum going, and then the whole COVID thing hit, of course. And so we kind of lost some momentum there latter part of last year. But since I was moving to Florida, I turned that over to Donna and Jesse there in Kansas City. So Bunker Labs, hopefully they've got a chapter somewhere near wherever you might be living. If not, you can certainly, they have some great programs you can apply for. Veteran in Residence program, which is like a 6-month, you get mentoring and get some space in one of the WeWork facilities nearby.
Really?
So it's definitely a good deal. They've got CEO Circle. I mean, they've got a lot of great programs going on. The guy who started it was a Navy officer, and his first ship was the USS Bunker Hill, which is how it became Bunker Labs. But it also serves the other military bunker purpose too. So play on words, but it's a great organization, and they're doing great things. And again, the point is, there's probably a great program near wherever you are. You just got to go seek them out and find them and get involved.
Yeah. And I don't even remember what the transition sort of classes you took when you were getting ready to get out. Was it TERP or?
They were called TAMP and TAP.
Yeah. And do they nowadays mention anything like Veteran on the Move as resources out there for people, or is it, because I don't remember any of these type of resources being explained to us during those things?
Not really. When I was going through those classes, they had an optional 3-day entrepreneurship pipeline you could sign up for. I'm like, yeah, I'm signing up for that. And they had some speakers come in and stuff that were more local folks, but it really wasn't. The problem with TAMP and TAP is it's contracted people, especially on the entrepreneurship side of things. It's contracted people that aren't really doing it themselves, or they didn't do it themselves. So whether they're transitioning to get a good job or transitioning to go into entrepreneurship, a lot of the people teaching the classes, I don't want to say that about all of them, of course, but it's just kind of an X in the box, and it's one size fits all typically. So it leaves a lot to be desired, all those transition programs and everything, no doubt.
Well, it sounds like you're just, by virtue of the fact that you've been around for a while and you got 400 episodes, you've got a pretty large audience out there. So it looks like they're getting the information. Somehow they're stumbling into it, whether it's word of mouth or they just Google you or which is, that's good to hear. So this is Joe Snooze Crane. He runs Veteran on the Move, veteranonthemove.com. It's a great place for veterans who are getting ready to transition into the civilian world. And this is Joe's second time on RAINMAN'S Take, so I appreciate his time. And if you like what we're doing here, please hit the like button and subscribe. So let's, on any of those programs, have you ever been invited to come talk as one of those entrepreneurs that is out there making it happen to these programs, or no? Not well. Yes, like I interviewed one of the professors or teachers at West Point, U.S. Military Academy, and she had been a Black Hawk pilot, and she taught a class on entrepreneurship at West Point. And so she came on my podcast, and then she invited me out to come to a football game in the fall, but of course I wasn't ever able to make that happen. And then IVMF, University of Syracuse Institute for Veterans, Military Families. I know like everybody in that program. I know everybody that runs that program, and I've had them on the show multiple times. And of course they've invited me up, several times to do some stuff, just be a part of it. But I've just never been able to make that happen. And one of the things I've enjoyed the most doing is going to podcasting conferences or military entrepreneurship. There's the Military Influencers Conference. A lot of the military and podcast-oriented conferences have been really something. And last year, right before everything shut down with COVID, there was a Military Creator Con, and it was in conjunction with
one of the podcasting conferences in Orlando. So the day before was all these different smaller conferences, and one of them was Military Creator Con. And I was able to speak and be on a panel up on stage about military podcasters at that one. So that was great.
Nice. I got to check some of those out, I think. I love it. So in terms of Bunker Labs, are they all over the country?
They're trying to get, their goal was to get at least one chapter in each state. And I think they're probably in the 30 or 40 locations at this point. Again, it kind of got slowed down by COVID there for a while, but they because of the COVID stuff, they're doing a lot of stuff virtually. So even if you don't have one near you, the veteran in residence or the CEO circle events that they do, some of the bunker brews events that they do and regional events, you might be able to jump in on them and get some stuff regionally. And, the key is you need to get around like-minded people. You need to get around other veterans that are interested in entrepreneurship if that's what you want to do. And that's what Bunker Labs provides. They provide that network. In theory, if they've got one in your town, your local Bunker Labs rep will have a network of not just military people, but the civilian side of things, which is who you really need to start networking with if you're getting out. And so that local network that you can plug into, whether you post-transition or ideally before you transition out, is what's key to getting started. So you just gotta know people, gotta meet people.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, just looking back on it, when I was getting ready to get out, I would, after you and I went to Iraq the second time, 2006, I get back out, and I never really thought about, it was always just, I'm just going to go back to doing what I was doing instead of going out there and kind of seeing if there, you got a brand new lease on your future. Right. And, probably wouldn't have hurt to just kind of see what else, could have happened. But, I agree. That's something that, my next door neighbor is a captain, Marine captain, and he's getting ready to get out next spring, and he's already starting to do all of his kind of research into transition, what he wants to do. So I'm definitely bringing up not only military or veteran on the move, but also the Bunker Labs as well, just to kind of let him know. And it would be interesting to see what he says about what are the resources that he's getting from Camp Pendleton. And that still blows my mind that you've got school programs out there that can't get the word out, and they don't have enough students to fill the seats in there.
Yeah. It's amazing. Again, the important thing is there's probably, there's an Army veteran up in Oregon who started Operation Code. You can go learn to code, write code, and get into programming and writing apps or, software and everything else. You can go learn to code, and it's a nonprofit. So they'll send you to school. They'll bring you up there and train you on how to become a coder if that's what you want to do when you get out. There's just, I could go on for hours there's just all sorts of really cool things out there. So the biggest problem with getting out is deciding what it is you really want to do. It's not easy sometimes because you don't realize what's available out there too. A lot of times like, oh, I never knew that. I never knew I could have done that. And there, face it, there are a lot of us, like, whether we just go back to doing what we did before, or a lot of guys are just like, I want to get out and I just want to be able to get a job making at least what I'm making now. And I'll call it good. They just get a job according to paycheck, not even something that might even halfway interest them,
Yeah. All right. So let's go through your timeline here. So when did you get done with the Marine Corps? Completely out.
The fall, like October of 2013.
Okay. And you went right back into flying commercially. And then when did you always want to start this podcast? I mean, go over again how you decided to do this as an airline pilot. How did you want to do this as your side hustle?
Well, for me, it started out with driving back and forth to work every morning and every evening. I just got tired of listening to the dang radio, like same old songs, commercials. I can't stand dedicated talk radio on the AM dial. I could listen to that kind of stuff, but like morning hype FM DJ stuff in the morning. It just drove me nuts after a while. And sometimes you had 30, 45-minute drive to work or drive home. And so I started listening to like CDs, like I'd buy CDs and listen to those. And then the whole concept of a podcast came out. And I remember paying like over $400 for some iPod. Remember those?
Oh yeah.
Like over $400. Like actually it was before we went to Iraq. I paid $400 and I tried to load up as much stuff on this thing as I possibly could. And you used to have, you couldn't stream because the speeds weren't big enough. So you had to sign up or commit to all these different podcasts and things you wanted to download on your computer. It took forever to download onto the computer. Then you had to transfer it onto the iPod. So you had to think way ahead, like days in advance. And so then I started going with my iPod to and from work, listening to all these different podcasts about everything. I mean, whether it was motivational or about real estate, or anything you could think of. I was listening to investments and all that stuff. And I just really fell in love with podcasting. I was a user. I was a listener of podcasts. And I started, as time went on, I started thinking, it'd be kind of cool to have my own podcast, but I never really knew what it would be about, or I didn't know what I would talk about. And then it morphed and became, when I was getting close to getting out of the Marine Corps, retiring, I wanted to I thought about starting a podcast about airline hiring or something. And, but the idea came along about my passion for entrepreneurship and my experience right before getting out of the Marine Corps and all these programs and resources and everything that were out there. And I'm like, man, I should just do a podcast on veteran business owners, because I've always had this natural curiosity when I would see it, when I knew find somebody that had a business or owned a business. I'd always dissect, like, how do you make money? Sometimes people would be like, what do you want to ask me all these questions from? I'm like, no, I'm just curious. Like how do you make money doing that? Like, I just want to know, just a natural curiosity about how a business operates. And so that's really how the whole thing came about was. And the other thing was like, I don't think I can sit here and talk on a microphone by myself in a room. I don't really have that much to say. So yeah. Like, I don't think I can sit here and talk to myself for 30 minutes, for an episode. And that's where the idea of an interview-based podcast came up. And I'm like, I can definitely interview business owners. And then I niched it down to military veteran business owners is going to be my target audience. And that's who I'm going to interview, and use that as a way to introduce veterans and future veterans to entrepreneurship.
And I have to imagine that probably you probably got a pretty good jump when you first started, because that, like we've just been talking about, there's nowhere that or especially back then, there was really nowhere where you could find all that stuff in one place. So yeah. Was it immediately popular?
Well, no. But we started throwing it out on social media and spreading the word. And I've had a number of different, quote, experts I've worked with over the years, social media experts, or, people. I'm always following the podcast trends about, things to do and things not to do to try to increase your listenership and that kind of thing. And, it started, I still remember when I got 100 downloads on one episode. That was a big milestone. And then I remember getting the first time I ever got 1,000 downloads on one episode. And, now it's way beyond that. But there's a lot more people listening to podcasts now too. So, I heard some interesting stats from one of the podcast conferences a few weeks ago. There's like a couple million podcasts now or something like that, which is kind of ridiculous. But back when I was starting, some of the stats we talked about, there were or are over 6,000 radio stations in the U.S. And back when I started podcasting, there were only 200 or 300 podcasts. And so you could see, if you correlate it to radio stations, which could be correlated or could not, with over 6 million radio stations in the U.S., 200,000 to 300,000 podcasts, there's a lot of room for growth. And so I think there's over 2 million podcasts now. However, using the metric of, if you count only the podcasts that have published an episode in the last 30 days, you still get down to around 200 or 300 podcasts that are still active. Meaning, like, there's a lot of podcasts out there, but most podcasts never make it past episode 7.
And it's every once in a while they put one out type of thing.
Yeah, and it's random. And that's how they use, if they use the metric of, well, who has actually published an episode in the last 30 days? You still get down to around 200,000-300,000 podcasts. And most of those podcasts most of those ones that aren't publishing anymore, they never got past episode 7.
That is amazing, because it's all the stuff that I've been watching on YouTube, and the big push is just get the momentum going. But once you get it going, you can't stop.
You got to keep it going.
Yeah. So,
especially if you get a listener that's starting to listen to you, and all of a sudden you don't publish, they're gone. You may not ever get back.
Yeah. Now, I assume you're at the point now where people are calling you to get on, or how are you finding your guests?
Yeah, I don't advertise anywhere for now. When I do put out a newsletter, and in the newsletter is, hey, you get a great guest for being on the show. So it is in there, but that only goes to my list of people. So most of my interviews come from people that have already been on the show. I always ask them, hey, let me know if you know anybody would be good for the show. And some people are really good at it, and some people you never hear back from them. But I get most of my people find the show on the internet, and they hit us up via the contact form to get on the show.
Very cool. Yeah, that's the one thing that sort of with RAINMAN'S Take, what kind of the way I pick what my interview is going to be is, if something pops up, whether it's on TV or I read it somewhere, and I say, wow, that sounds really interesting, I'd love to talk to this person about it. And I figure if I'm interested in it, there's got to be a few more people out there in the ether that would be interested in learning more about it. And quite frankly, and I just used, I'll use this as an example. I just yesterday sent an email to a retired Marine colonel who works for the DA's office in New York City, because I just read his book called The Thieves of Baghdad, which was, he was basically in charge of trying to recover the stolen antiquities and artifacts that were stolen out of the Baghdad National Museum at the invasion in April of 2003. And it's just a fascinating book. And the reason why I read that book just recently is there's a small local art gallery just right up the street from us that we're involved in. And the executive director, he and I, we had an event up there a couple of months ago, and he and I were talking, and it turns out he was a curator for museums in the past, and he was really interested in that whole concept of stolen art, stolen antiquities, and how that affects the culture and all those things. And so I had him on a podcast, and then I read this book, and I was like, wow, I would love to. So I just out of the blue emailed the guy, and so waiting to hear back. But it was it's kind of one of those things. So that's kind of how I track things down. And then the other episodes that I do, where it's just kind of me reflecting on current events or something like that. Like you said, it's tough to do that for a half hour. So it's a lot more prep time doing that than it is.
It's way more energy and work to just be a solo host like that.
Yeah. And if that was going to be the crux of RAINMAN'S Take, then I would definitely want to try to get somebody on where you can kind of at least have a conversation about a certain topic. So it's a heck of a lot easier to do that. And as you're talking, things pop up that are interesting that you kind of say, okay, expound on that type of thing. So expound on this. What were some of when you first decided that you wanted to start a podcast, were you still actually in the Marine Corps?
Yes, I was within my last year.
Okay. And what did you do to kind of get, okay, Joe says, I'm going to start a podcast. Now what? What did you do in terms of educating yourself, and how did you get to that point where you were ready to start your first episode?
I started searching online, and like I started basically just started Googling things like, and I figured out, first thing I figured out was all that stuff that's in iTunes or in Apple Podcasts now, all those directories and everything, that's all it is a directory. None of the stuff, iTunes doesn't host any of that. The audio and all those download files and podcasts, they're all hosted at other places. And iTunes and all these podcatchers, all they are is directories. The stuff's not resident there at all. And that was like a big eye opener for me. Like, really? And that's how ignorant I was about the podcast process. I didn't even know that. And then there were a few podcast coaches out there that I kind of looked at, and they had expensive courses. And what did it for me really was, John Lee Dumas, who's an army captain. He had just started a podcast like 6 months before I was looking at it, and he came up with his own podcasting course. It's called Podcast Paradise, and I think it's really expensive to get in now, but I got in for a few $100 back then because he had just started it like a month or two before I jumped in, and that helped with a lot of the technical aspects of things. And then he also had good strategy for building listenership and everything else. And I actually hired John Lee Dumas personally to be my podcast coach. He wasn't cheap, but I wanted to hear from one, because he was really popular at the time and still is, and he was a military guy. And so I actually paid him for like 2 or 3 months, met with him once a week. And I consider myself a John Dumas trained podcaster. I followed his plan to a T. I've changed it up a little bit here over the years, here and there, and doing my own thing, but you got to evolve with the times. So in the very beginning, it was all John Lee Dumas' plan.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. You got to find mentors. You got to find people that are already doing what you want to do, and sometimes even if it's expensive to charge them money, it's like going through flight school. You got to get the gouge. I mean, the gouge is always the shortcuts and the good info and the stuff that you really, really need to know.
Yeah.
And some people pay for the gouge, and I've always been a big fan of paying for information shortcuts. It was worth it, man. I was off and running.
Yeah, and again, talking with Joe Crane here, and it's veteranonthemove.com, and his podcast is Veteran on the Move, focused on helping veterans as they get ready to transition out and into maybe an entrepreneurial type career. So check it out if you are a veteran, or if you want to hear about what veterans are doing after they get out of their military service. And it's a really, really great resource for people that are getting ready to transition out. So now, when you started just doing audio, MP3, is that all you do still, or have you transitioned it all to video, like YouTube, or strictly?
Yeah, I do both now. For several years, I just started doing video maybe a year or two ago at the most. And when Zoom came out and Zoom made it as easy as Zoom makes it, that's when I just said, well, I might as well just do the video too. And so I record the video on Zoom, and I just throw that on YouTube as is. I don't edit any of the stuff that goes on the YouTube channel. And then the edited with, pre-intro and fancy intros and outros and all that audio stuff that's for the podcast, all that just goes out on the podcast.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. It's, what I've been doing is like, I'll take this and I'll put my canned intro and canned outro onto it, and then put it out there. So it's, I did not do the, pay for a mentor to go through. I watched a couple of videos, read a couple of John Lee Dumas's books, and then just kind of jumped right into it. But
well, it's easier now too. Like you almost don't have to do that now, because there's so many tools and software and everything else that's come along, and all of it's come a long ways. But back then, just the technical aspects of how to run it through a mixer and get a decent microphone hooked into a mixer. You can buy these all-in-one systems, and you couldn't really do that back then. So if you do have a little bit of help here and there, you can figure it out a whole lot easier, and it's a lot easier to get it up and running on iTunes and everything else.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, well, last time you and I spoke, we were talking about the nuts and bolts of actually doing a podcast. And you had said, get rid of as much of the grunt work as you can, so you can focus on the big picture. And what I found is, and like you just said, there are programs out there that are so easy that guys like me can handle it. So, the editing software is I'm now got it down where I'm very comfortable doing that. Whereas, I don't know what I would have done if it was way over my head.
Yeah. And the thing about starting a podcast is you're starting a business, and when you start a business, some of the mechanics and the simplicity of things might make you skip over the important parts. And the important thing is, like we learned in the military, you have to have a mission statement. You have to have a plan, whether it's a business plan or a 5-paragraph order. You have to be very resolved in what you're about to jump into, because invariably you're going to come to the forks in the road. And if you don't have a clear vision of where you want this venture to go, you're not going to know whether to go left or right. Or you're going to hit roadblocks. And if you don't have a well-defined plan of some sort for business or podcasting or anything else, you're not going to make it very far before you get bogged down in the weeds, and then it becomes painful and you just give up.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you get so intimidated by that process that you don't even start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, all right. So you are also an airline pilot. So you have that lifestyle where you're gone for 10 days and then you're back for 2 weeks type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you just front load a bunch of interviews on those days that you're home, or how does that work?
Yeah, pretty much. I use Schedule Once, which you just send somebody a link, and I keep my calendar update, my availability updated on that calendar as best I can. And I can only plan out a couple of weeks at a time, really. And, because my schedule changes all the time. So I'm putting, days off here. I'm going to do some podcasting then, and then keep sending it out to people. When people contact me about coming on the podcast, I talk to them. It's like, hey, you're on the list. When I update my calendar, we'll send you out the information. So I kind of accrue names and email addresses as we go along. And then every time I add slots on my calendar, we send out to everybody on the list saying, here's some more times. And we've had people on my list for more than a year, and never matched up. And then finally you get a time that matches up. So the only way to do it is you got to batch them. You got to upload. I'm about 2 months out on completed podcast episodes right now. So then I release one a week. So as long as I'm doing about one a week, that my queue will stay full.
Yeah.
There's been times where it's been Sunday night and I got an episode to go out Monday and I haven't done an interview. I've had to call in some favors on it with some people and pull off an interview at the last minute. It's not fun to be in that position, but you just got to try to balance it as best you can.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the most interviews you've done in one day?
I think I did 5.
Really?
And for me, that's tough. Like John Lee Dumas, he does when he was doing an episode every day of the week, 7 days a week, he would do 8 on Mondays. So he'd always have one extra in case somebody dropped out.
Yeah.
He would do 8 on Monday, and by Monday night had them all edited and loaded up and ready to go. And that would last him a week. And then the next Monday he'd do 8 more.
And I was always under the impression he was 30-minute long.
He was under 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Every one of them. Yeah.
But you're doing full length interviews.
Yeah, but I try to keep it under 30 minutes.
Oh, you do? Okay. Okay.
Yep. Try to keep it compact. I mean, sometimes we get up around 45, but I try to keep it smaller than that.
Okay. And because I obviously, I'm not like Joe Rogan, who's out there talking for 3.5 hours with somebody, which that would be a workout, by the way. I like mine to be somewhere in the hour to hour and a half range. What was your strategy about doing it the shorter interview?
It goes back to this. Some of this info came from John Dumas, by the way. The average commute time in America was like 26 and a half or 27 and a half or 28 minutes. So the concept was most people commuting to and from work can get one episode in on the way there or one episode in on the way home, and then they're done.
That makes sense.
That's really where it came from.
That makes sense. And so how do you do that? When you get somebody, when you get a guest lined up, you're getting ready to have the call with them, how much pre-planning are you doing to keep it, to just get the nuggets that you want to get out of that person within those 30 minutes?
Most of my interviews follow a similar flow with everybody. And I really don't do a lot of pre-interview prep work. I just don't have the time for it. And I found that the more research I do on the guest, the less curious I am. So it makes for a better interview if I really don't know what the answer is going to be when I talk to people, or if I really don't know where the interview is going to go. And of course, it is a huge time factor to really research somebody in detail. And a lot of people are hard to research depending on who they are. And so it just works out better for me to, I mean, sometimes about all I know is what branch of the military they're in, what their name is, and what the name of their company is. And then we go from there. And I just let my natural curiosity dig into it from there.
Yeah. And obviously they're coming on, so they want to pitch it. So they've got their points that they want to get across as well. So,
yeah. And I don't interview famous people necessarily. I did interview Dale Dye, but probably the most famous, because I mean, it'd be cool to interview famous people, but most military folks getting out of the military, they can't relate to a famous multi-billionaire or whatever. Yeah. They want to hear about the guy who's who's a year or two down the runway from where they are.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that guy is about like me. If he can do it, then I can do it. So it really doesn't do, I mean, it might do good for popularity's sake to interview famous people, but it really doesn't do the listeners any good.
Yeah.
If I'm, aiming for that.
Well, that's interesting you say it, because, and I guess I'll paraphrase or put in quotes the celebrity aspect of it, but you get a lot of, and they all seem to be nowadays former Navy SEALs. You got the guys you got Jocko Willink, who's a super famous podcaster and consultant. You've got the guys that do Black Rifle Coffee. I think those guys are former Navy SEAls. So in terms of the celebrity, which is the guy that was in the military that actually got out and actually has a job that most people would recognize the name of the business. I mean, those guys, are you able to get those guys as well, or is it?
Well, like I said, I might be able to, but I don't go after people anymore. There's lots of agents, and people will hire agents. So I do get pinged by a lot of agents saying, hey, I'm representing so-and-so who has a company and they're running a PR campaign or something. So they want me to interview the CEO of this or the president of this, and they're military veterans too. So you get a lot of those. So there's been a few times, it just changes the dynamics when somebody gets an email and says, please come on my podcast. It kind of changes the positioning of things, I guess you could say. And in the past, I have tried to ping people, hit people up on Facebook, whatever, try to talk them into it. And it usually just doesn't go very well. you can't get through their filter mechanisms or whatever.
Yeah.
So the best way to get anybody to come on the podcast as an interview is to have somebody refer them to me, or me refer me to them. And so that's what I rely on, is I rely on referrals. And so anybody you've ever interviewed on your podcast, you have a very intimate, trustworthy relationship with that person for the rest of your life. Like, out of these 408 people that I've interviewed, I could call up or email any one of them and they're going to respond now, because we know each other. I mean, we spent 30 dedicated minutes talking, and that right there is very powerful. Yeah. And so if any of those people know someone that I want to interview, that's the route to take if you can do that. So yeah, I've tried to get significant people like that from time to time, and it usually just doesn't work well. So gotcha. As long as I'm filling interview slots with quality veterans and military spouses that have good businesses, then I'm good with that.
Yeah. Well, and obviously you're getting 5 or 50,000 views per episode at least, which is pretty awesome. Again, it's Joe Crane, call sign Snooze. He and I flew together in the Marine Corps, and Joe runs Veteran on the Move, which is a podcast, as well as veteranonthemove.com, which has got some great resources for the vets out there. Definitely love having Joe on RAINMAN'S Take. So if you like what we're doing here, hit the like button and subscribe. So Snooze, let's talk a little bit about future. I know that there was a couple of things that you had talked about in our last episode that were sort of pie in the sky stuff that you'd like to do down the road. Are there any things that you've recently kind of thought about that you're excited about, or you just like keep trucking with Veteran on the Move podcast?
Yeah, a little bit. Like for example, when I started the podcast, it's all about veteran entrepreneurship, and it still really is. But less than 5% of veterans go into entrepreneurship or start their own business. It's not very high numbers. 95% enter the workforce. And there's so much else that we can talk about. There's so much else we can cover in the world of transition. I love talking about transitioning out of the military. And so I've been talking with like Jason from Pre-Veteran, talking with him quite a bit, because he's focusing on the 95% to get out and get jobs. And so I've been looking at and playing around with doing more general transition type subjects and transitioning and getting jobs, and the gouge on getting jobs and programs to help. Like Jason's got phenomenal he really calls it transformation more than transition. You really have to transform to go back into the civilian sector and get a good career in the civilian sector. So I am exploring the whole transition for employment space a little more than I have in the past, and broaden the aperture a little bit, not just veteran entrepreneurship, but veteran transition into the civilian sector.
Yeah. And again, it still blows my mind that in 15 years ago when we were getting out, yeah, okay, it was, this sort of stuff was kind of in its infancy, but the resources were obviously still there. So there's a disconnect right there that seems like it could be pretty easily filled. Well, not easily, but
there's a Grand Canyon disconnect. Like, you've got all these veterans that want to get out and get good jobs. And you got all these companies that want to hire veterans, but they're standing on the opposite side of the canyon and they can't seem to connect with each other. It's been there for forever, really. And it's amazing. And some companies are figuring it out. Some veterans figure it out, but there's always that broad disconnect between all the veterans getting out and wanting good jobs and all these companies that want to hire them, but they just can't figure it out. It's funny.
Interesting. So you're thinking about it. Is that where we are right now? Just kind of in the conceptualizing stage, or?
Yeah. Well, Jason over at Pre-Veteran, he's doing great stuff, and I've been talking to him on a regular basis about. Gotcha. We were kind of in the same space, but I'm more entrepreneurship and he's more employment. But I haven't really changed a whole lot or done much, but looking to bring more generalized, getting a good job interviews on the podcast here in the near future.
Got it. All right. Well, listen, it was Great talking to you again, Snooze.
It's awesome.
Thanks for your time, brother. And again, this is Joe Crane with veteranonthemove.com and Veteran on the Move podcast. So if you are a veteran and you're getting ready to transition out into the civilian world, definitely hit up his website and his podcast. There's a lot of great information. Snooze, I appreciate it, brother.
You bet. Thanks, Ray, man. Always good talking with you.
Absolutely. All right, guys, this is the Rain Man. Thanks for watching. And let me close out by saying, if you're in the military, the police departments, fire departments, or first responders, if that's you out there, thank you for your service. Stay safe. Joe Crane, I appreciate it.
All right. Appreciate it, guys. You have me out.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, Observations on the World We Live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.